Mary, I want to also introduce Katie Ellis, who is here with her today. Katie is a graduate of CLE, Community Leadership Development in the college, and is probably familiar to many of you. She has now taken the position of managing director of the Berry Center. She tells me she's moved to LaGrange, the suburb of Henry County, I guess. But we're very happy to have Katie here, and Katie is a really important cog in the Berry Center operations. So let me briefly talk about Mary Smith, and start by saying one of the great things that I found in my 38 years in Kentucky now is the opportunity to know and be friends with the Berry family. And Mary was one of those that I had, one of those family members that I've known forever. I can't remember when I didn't know Mary. And it is, you know, of course, that it is an important, incredibly important family that has led Kentucky agriculture in many, many different ways. I don't think I'm making this up, Mary, but I think I remember a conversation about 5 years ago where we were at Azure, and you were kind of talking about what you were going to do next. And it wasn't, you didn't say the words the Berry Center, but I think we talked about how do we sustain that, the momentum that was created over the last several decades by the work of her father Wendell and her uncle and grandfather, who were incredibly important figures in Kentucky agriculture as well. And we talked about the importance of sustaining that legacy and building upon it and continuing the momentum. And so next thing I knew, the Berry Center was formed, and Mary is the founder of the Berry Center. She's going to tell us what the Berry Center is and wants to do. I was pleased to join the board in the fall of last year, I guess, sometime. And she is also acting as the director of the Berry Center. And in that role, she herself has become a spokesperson at the national level for the Kentucky agrarianism and new agriculture, and particularly for the farmers whom she not only grew up with but continues to live with. She is currently married to Steve Smith, a pioneer in CSAs and organic agriculture in Kentucky, and they still operate the farm together. Mary is, as I say, now a distinguished spokesperson for that legacy of what I call Kentucky agrarianism. So, Mary, we're really glad to have you.
Well, that was much nicer than I deserve, but I thank you all. And I want to say, to start, I have been speaking a lot nationally, and it's a lot easier to go someplace else and talk, because then you leave, and there's no repercussion. So, but there are many good friends in this room. In particular, it is so wonderful to see my friend Sue Went. I'm not sure where she is, but she was, talk about pioneers. Sue was a pioneering advocate for small farmers with Partners for Family Farms, and I am just so pleased to be in the same room with you again. Thank you to everybody who put this meeting together. It's just an incredibly good thing that you all are doing, and I am, on behalf of my family, grateful to all of you. Thank you to Bob and his staff. I think they've already been thanked, but that was one delicious omelet, and so I'll add my thanks. I will say, when I got here and heard that there was a fire alarm, Katie and I were just in Georgia and came down to eat breakfast at the Holiday Inn in Duluth, and the fire alarm went off, and I noticed that most of the patrons sat in their chairs and the staff all ran out the door. But it turned out that some kid had tried to dry her clothes in the microwave. But now I'm thinking, well, maybe one of us is some kind of firebug, but anyway. And to Scott, I have had the great good fortune of being surrounded by exceptional people who were and are exceptionally generous to me. Of course, starting with my parents and grandparents, but also men and women who just made themselves present in my life. I remember in particular a farmer from Henry County named Phil Powell, who was just around a lot during our first years of farming in the early 80s. It took 20 years for me to realize that he was giving us the gift of his experience. I've had a chance to thank him in print and personally. Some of the people who were generous to us died before I was old enough to know how generous they had been. I am now old enough to know it when I see it. I want to add to that list my invaluable friend Scott Smith. His willingness and openness to work with the Berry Center and my family has made me believe that the Berry Center can bridge the divide in agriculture that I will speak a little about. Good work always comes down to a person willing to do it, and Scott has made all the difference, and I thank you. I'm going to start just to give you all a little idea of the Berry Center. This is a historical day. I think this is I think a PowerPoint. It's the first one I've ever had anything to do with. But when I was young, my grandparents called this a slideshow, and I lived in fear of them. But it's short. I just want to give you some idea of where we are and what our center looks like, although it looks a lot better now than it did in the picture you're about to see. But I want to start with this picture. I'm going to speak about this farm when I talk in just a few minutes, but this is what we call the home place and call the home place. This is my father in about 1974 with hair. This is my Uncle John Berry Jr. and John lives at the home place right now, and my wonderful grandfather John Berry Sr. My father says of his work and of John's work, Big John, which is what we called him, did the important work because he put an economy on the ground in Kentucky and the 8-state Burley Belt for small farmers. So that's where it kind of started about 8 generations ago. And as I said, my Uncle John lives there now. And Katie is either unwilling to trust me with the clicker thing, or I'm unwilling to be trusted with it. So next slide, please. That's Dad. That's without hair, just so you can see the contrast. This is in his backyard. This picture was taken for the catalog or the book that was done. Daddy did the Jefferson lecture a couple of years ago, and so that's Dad in his wood pile. Seems self-evident. So, and then we had my mother, who, as my father says, his work would have been impossible without, and that is absolutely true. Now there is my Uncle John with my father on their farm, and that border collie's name is Maggie, and makes it into more pictures than my children do. Upsets them a good deal. And is that it? Oh, that is the courthouse in Newcastle. People in LaGrange would be so surprised to find out that Oldham County is a suburb of Henry County, but I'm delighted, and I'm going to quote that. Anyway, this is the courthouse in Henry County now. The next slide is a terrible picture of the Berry Center. It looks so much better now, and I don't know what that was for. What did we take that for? To see the side? Oh. It was built in 1828. The last member of the family that built it died in the 60s, I think, and it's been many things since then, including a bed and breakfast. My office was the honeymoon suite, and it had a bathtub right in the middle of the floor and a toilet partitioned off in the corner. So I'd just like to know how long you'd have to be married to make that a good idea. And the next slide is, this is the log cabin that sits right next to the Berry Center, and it is now the bookstore at the Berry Center. And we have a wonderful manager named Mary Jane Yates, and it's a beautiful place. It houses a lot of agrarian books, my father's friends' books, a lot of books from the UK press. And as I always say, a lot of children's books so we can sell something. So I think that's the extent. And so, now to the work of the Berry Center. I went to visit my father, Wendell Berry, some years ago to talk about problems in our home place of Henry County, Kentucky, that I felt weren't being talked about in the places they should be talked about. That was 2009. I was serving on 2 agricultural boards, one representing mostly small entrepreneurial farming and the other mostly large conventional farming. The boards had 2 things in common. One, an absolute belief that what they were doing was serving the best interests of farmers, and the other, very little understanding of agrarian history in this state. Attending board meetings felt like being swept along in someone else's fantasies. Those boards also perfectly showed where agriculture is today. We have a bipolar food system that offers consumers only 2 food choices: buying directly from small farmers through farmers markets or other direct marketing arrangements, or buying mass-produced, usually high-processed foods that arrive through supply chains dominated by mega food firms offering virtually no traceability or differentiated characteristics. I remember reciting a list of things to my father that I thought needed to be addressed: education for farmers, access to land and to capital, advocacy, good farm policy. Most importantly, some kind of program that took our farmers out of a boom and bust economy and protected them in the marketplace. He did what he always does when faced with a flurry of words and ideas, and stated the logical place to begin the conversation. He said, "You know, nobody is even asking the right questions, and asking the questions from a rural point of view." That conversation was the start of the Berry Center, and that statement the part of a partnership between Louisville Metro Government, the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, and the Berry Center. We have committed ourselves to finding out what is really going on in the countryside around Louisville. The difficulty of the predicament we are in must be fully acknowledged to begin this survey and to get a useful outcome. 16% of us now live in rural places. Of that number, so few of us farm that we are no longer counted on the U.S. Census. We have come to a time when the demand for local food going up has met the rural culture coming down. It was bound to happen. But that demand for locally grown food is hopeful. There is good evidence now that there is more demand for local food than there is supply. If we can put an economy around this for farmers, we might get to a place that we can do more than just imagine a culture that supports small farmers and land-conserving communities. To do this, and for the good of all, we must heal the long-broken connection between urban and rural places. I think that is what we are all doing here. On the urban side, we must stop fantasizing about what is going on in the countryside. There simply is not a population of farmers, and since we're in Kentucky, I will use Kentucky, although I think it works most places, that are just dying to raise organic produce for an unpredictable local market. An editorial that appeared in the New York Times on August 9, 2014, written by Glenn Smith, explained farmers' predicament very well. He writes, "The dirty secret of the food movement is that the much celebrated small-scale farmer isn't making a living. After the tools are put away, we head out to second and third jobs to keep our farms afloat. 91% of all farm households rely on multiple sources of income. Healthcare, paying for our kids' college, preparing for retirement, is not happening. With the overwhelming majority of American farmers operating at a loss, the median farm income was negative $1,453 in 2012. Farmers could barely keep the chickens fed and the lights on." Unquote. We must remember that farming people are going to be a lot harder to replace than they were to get rid of, and that contrary to popular assumption, good farmers are not in any simple way part of the labor force. Our work is to acknowledge the importance of a stable farm population and then do what it takes to have one. I believe that the surveys that have been done in and around Louisville in the last years have been game-changing in many ways, and I am grateful. They improved our conversation, informed our imaginations about what is possible, and if they had done nothing but make it possible to hire Sarah Fritzner to run the mayor's Farm to Table program, they would have done more than we knew enough to hope for. It is right that we do our part to further the work by understanding what is going on in the countryside. Here are some questions that my father and I wrote down last winter, really to start our thinking about the survey. 1, what do farmers need to produce food for local markets? 2, what do farmers need to know in order to be willing to produce food for local markets? 3, what could local government do to help? 4, what is the role of subsistence, of family help, of neighborly exchange? 5, what percentage of the land is controlled by two-crop farmers, corn and soybeans? 6, how much of the land being farmed is farmed by renters? 7, what percentage of the land is being farmed well? How much diversity? How much perennial cover? Food is a cultural product, so we must have cultural answers. We must have both qualitative and quantitative answers. According to the 2012 agricultural census, Kentucky has 77,000 family farms, way down from the 84,000 number I had been quoting until recently. The same census reports that Kentucky leads the nation in loss of farmland to development. The only way to stop that is a good, not toxic farm economy. If communities of farmers and consumers wish to promote a sustainable, safe, reasonably inexpensive supply of good food, then they must see that the best, the safest, and most dependable source of food for a city is not the global economy, with its extreme vulnerabilities and extravagant transportation costs, but its own surrounding countryside. It is in every way in the best interest of urban consumers to be surrounded by productive land, well farmed and well maintained by thriving farm families in thriving farm communities. We had, in my memory, a diversified agriculture that looked something like what I just described. It was supported by the Burley Tobacco Program. In the lead up to the end of the tobacco program, Kentucky farmers were bombarded with news articles explaining why the program should be abolished and how Kentucky farmers would be better off without it. Our then governor called it a Depression-era program, and our state's largest farm lobby said that our farmers could outcompete anyone. All such talk ended when the program ended. That was 11 years ago, and the matter has not been revisited to see if the claims and promises match the realities at home. Because of the stigma of tobacco, I believe that the only farm program that served the interests of the people it was supposed to serve has been forgotten. At the Berry Center, we are studying that program to see how it might be used again, this time for anything a farmer produces, from tomatoes to timber. I don't think I'll be alive when this happens, but I'm working on it. The work done in Louisville and Lexington gives me reason to think that cities and the food-producing landscapes around them are a possible beginning place for a new way to talk about policy. I've invited some very smart people with what I think are some of the best agrarian minds in our state to begin to work on this issue. 11 years without the program also gives us a good context for the supply-side study I talked about just a minute ago. My husband said to me recently, in response to my complaining about a particularly unfocused meeting, that we can stop brainstorming now. My husband and I have been going to meetings about the problems of agriculture for 30-plus years. My father for 50-plus. This effort has a long history. I've come to see even our mistakes as positives, as necessary steps in a process that brings us together today to talk about Kentucky's two largest cities working to bring about some kind of local food system. I want to share with you another list that my father and I wrote recently. Dad's big on lists. To bring focus to the Berry Center's work with the Producers Program. It seems to me that every community ought to work on a list like this. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? All these lists should be different. I think it speaks to the trouble we are in that this one would work anywhere now. It is. 1. Metropolitan Louisville is adjacent to a fertile, well-watered countryside, potentially capable of supplying a regional food economy, but also vulnerable to erosion, currently much misused by highly erosive and toxic corn and bean production, and populated by too few farmers. 2. Louisville is probably a city small enough to establish a coherent and responsible partnership with the food producers of its region. 3. We are pleased and much encouraged by Louisville's efforts in recent years to establish such a partnership as a necessary part of economic development. Such a partnership would offer improved food security and food quality to consumers, as well as needed protection to food producers and their land. 4. This is a large undertaking that divides immediately into a lot of small problems looking for small solutions. 5. At present, the demand for local food in Louisville appears to be running well ahead of the available supply. 6. The reason for this is that there is no existing apparatus for bringing together representatives of the two economic sides, demand and supply, to negotiate prices and assurances. There is currently not even an apparatus for determining who and how empowered such representatives might be. 7. The problem, which will have to be complexly and patiently solved over probably a long time, is that most farmers will not trust a market for which they don't individually know how much to produce or in which they have no asking price. 8. The farmers of our region remember favorably the now defunct federal tobacco program, which combined price supports with production controls, a combination of principles that have been revived in the dairy cooperative Organic Valley. 9. But the major part of our farmers' experience has been of gambling year after year as price takers on the agribusiness free market. They are not going to enter a Louisville region food economy if it offers only another opportunity to gamble. I want to end with a story that I include in most talks I give. It is the story of the start of my family's public life, and more importantly, it is the story that, except for a few years here and there in our history, tells a common agricultural story. One night in the winter of 1907, at what we have always called the home place, which is right there, in Henry County, Kentucky, my grandfather, then 6 years old, sat with his older brother and listened as their parents spoke of the uses they would have for the money from their 1906 tobacco crop. The crop was to be sold at auction in Louisville on the next day. They would have been sitting in the light of a kerosene lamp close to the stove, warming themselves before bedtime. They were not wealthy people. I believe that the debt on their farm was not fully paid. There would have been interest to pay. There would have been other debts. The depression of the 1890s would have left them burdened. Perhaps after the income from the crop had paid their obligations, there would be some money that they could spend as they chose. At around 2 o'clock the next morning, my father was wakened by horses' shod hooves on the stones of the driveway. His father was leaving to catch the train to see the crop sold. He came home that evening, as my father later would put it, without a dime. After the crop had paid its transportation to market and the commission on its sale, there was nothing left. Thus began my grandfather's lifelong advocacy, later my uncle's and my father's, and now my brother's and my own, for land-conserving economies. The varied farm program that we started at St. Catherine College began with Wes Jackson's idea of a curriculum for homecoming. He says that the primary major in universities and colleges for the last 50 years has been upward mobility, and now it needs to be homecoming. I believe that our work is to give these young people who want to come home something to come home to. I can't think of better work. And because I am the daughter of a poet, I'm going to end with a poem called A Vision. If we will have the wisdom to survive, to stand like slow-growing trees on a ruined place, renewing, enriching it, if we will have our seasons welcomed here, asking not too much of earth or heaven, then a long time after we are dead, the lives our lives prepare will live here, their houses strongly placed, upon the valley sides, fields and gardens, rich in the windows, The river will run clear as we will never know it, and over it birdsong like a canopy. On the levels of the hills will be green meadows, stock bells in noon shade. On the steeps where greed and ignorance cut down, the old forest, an old forest, will stand. Its rich leaf fall drifting on its roots. The veins of forgotten springs will have opened. Families will be singing in the fields. In their voices they will hear a music risen out of the ground. They will take nothing from the ground, they will not return, whatever the grief in parting. Memory, native to this valley, will spring over it like a grove, and memory will grow into legend, legend into song, song into sacrament. The abundance of this place, the songs of its people and its birds, will be health and wisdom and indwelling light. This is no dream of paradise. Its hardship is its possibility. And now, I have been told that I should answer some questions, but my deal with Scott is that he has to answer them all. Thank you.